Let's talk a little Florida baseball, SEC baseball, and, of course, your bracketology. We'll start with Florida. Right now, as we speak, the SEC tournament in Hoover, Alabama is going on. The Gators set to play what is later today. At the time this drops, Florida will already have played. But Florida set to take on Vanderbilt in the first round. This is single elimination. Florida right now sitting at 28-26 overall, 13-17 in your conference, or in the conference, excuse me. In your mind, Neil, your overall feelings on Florida's chances in the SEC tournament? Do you have a feeling that they could make a run, that they need to make a run? Oh, by the way, the winner of this game gets Tennessee on Thursday afternoon. So what's the mood like from Gator Nation in regards to mood around this baseball team going into the SEC tournament? Is there a hope and a belief that they could catch fire?
I think that Florida is safe because they went to Georgia and they beat the Dogs in Athens. Also, on top of that, Florida also has a road series win at LSU. That's another top 50 RPI team. They had what was the most impressive series win in the country up until a couple weeks ago, and they started this sort of slide. But beating Texas A&M 2 out of 3, another team that's in the conversation for a regional hosting spot in Mississippi State. Florida beat them 2 out of 3. So there are just too many good data points against the. There's really only one terrible one that's getting swept at Missouri, but you stack that one bad weekend up against all these other good things. Even with the record being as mediocre as it is, I think Florida is fairly safe. The last real hurdle I think they had wasn't the RPI or the strength of schedule. Those things are boosting them up, or their big wins bullet. It was the fact that you have to have a winning record to get in the NCAA tournament. Now, Florida is guaranteed that because you lose the first game to Vanderbilt, you're still one game over 500. You win the first game of the SEC tournament, it becomes double elimination. So Florida could then lose 2 in a row and get bounced. But at that point, Florida would be over 500, and they could, or by over 500 by 3 games, and they could afford to lose 2 in a row. So they're going to have the winning record regardless now because of that win at Georgia last weekend. But as far as what their outlook is, I mean, we don't know. That's the thing. You get swept at Missouri. That proves you can lose to a bad team. That proves you can lose multiple times to a bad team because that's what the postseason is. You got to lose twice to have your season ended. And it proves that Florida has also proved that they can go and beat good teams in their home field. That's what they just did to Georgia. And Miami obviously is not a great team, but that's still that's a decent program that's got a decent amount of talent. You went down there and took 2 out of 3 too. So if you're Florida, you are obviously very disappointed at how the season has gone. Jack Caglione's last season, Liam Peterson has been good, but he hasn't been that instant impact freshman. And stepping all the way back to when you get Austin from UCLA in the transfer portal last year, he doesn't wind up on campus. A lot of things coming together to make this season less than what we thought it was going to be. But at the end of the day, for a 3 seed, which is probably what Florida is going to be, you kind of have to like their chances. And from the other side of it, if you're a regional host, or even if you're a regional 2 seed, you don't want to see the Gators in your bracket.
So looking at your bracketology, Neil, just taking a look at this, I'm just counting up the SEC seeds that you have hosting. And again, this dropped on Monday afternoon. You got Tennessee is the 1, and these are overall national seeds. So Tennessee is the 1. You've got, where did it go? It's all over the place. Kentucky is the 2, Texas A&M the 3, Arkansas the 4, North Carolina the 5, Clemson the 6, Oregon State the 7, and then who is Oklahoma number 8. Those are the top 8 national seeds. I'll allow you guys to go look at the graphic and check out the rest. There's a couple other SEC teams in there. Georgia as the 11, for example, that is hosting, and I believe that's all the SEC host sites. And again, Neil, you have Florida getting in as a 3 seed in the Clemson regional. So when you look at the landscape of the SEC, let me start there first, because the big debate right now is there are 11 teams that folks feel strongly about getting in, argue they deserve to get in. There's some teams right now that, kind of on that bubble, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Alabama. Some would argue Florida. Some would argue LSU. Who gets left out? Again, I'm looking at the graphic now, but in your mind, like if you're making the decisions, you're the committee, who deserves to get in, who deserves to get left out? Do you feel like all 11 of those teams in the SEC deserve to be in the postseason?
Yeah. So right there, you kind of hit on what I was going to say. There's no law against having all 14 teams in the SEC. And if all 14 teams in the SEC have resumes, they have bullet points that prove that they're worthy of being in that field of 64. And because of the strength of schedule that every SEC team has, because they play other SEC teams, I mean, like, I don't know what else to say to ACC or Big 12 or Pac 12. I mean, they're not a thing anymore, but, West Coast teams, I'm sorry, but the SEC just is the best conference. It's not really something that's up for debate. They kind of prove it every year. But if the SEC has 11 teams that are going to be able to show on merit that they can get into the field 64, then the NCAA selection committee will have 11 teams in the field. And I think that they all do. LSU is maybe the one that I would say is probably the one most in danger. Maybe you could say Vanderbilt, but I mean, Florida at this point to me feels like the safest. And that's not me being a homer. That's me going, all right, well, you have a series win over 2 of the 16 regional hosts I have. You have another series win over a team that is fighting for it. Mississippi State certainly could get themselves in there. But I mean, LSU has the lowest RPI, I think, of all those teams. I mean, they're 30 last I checked. Vandy is 26. I want to say Alabama is higher than all of them. South Carolina, I think, also in the teens. Florida is at 22. So if there's going to be one left out, you probably say it's LSU. And if they can win games in Hoover, Ole Miss is probably going to give themselves a spot because their RPI right now is in the top 30. So it's only because of the same thing I said about Florida that, you have to have a winning record to get into the tournament. They don't. That's what's keeping them out. Their RPI actually, I think, is 32, so that they're just outside that top 30. They actually fell out after this past weekend because LSU went and put a thing on them. But Florida seems to be the safest, along with Alabama and South Carolina, those three. And then after that, Vandy and LSU kind of feel like the next group. But I think that all five, barring a collapse, I mean, maybe Vandy loses to Florida today, and this will air after that game happens. But if Vanderbilt were to lose today and then other teams were to really boost their resumes, like let's say Cincinnati were to get hot, or a Cal or a Utah or a K-State were to get hot all at the same time, or 2 of those 3 teams get hot at the same time and they all run through their conferences and they steal bids or something like that, then maybe you could see them not getting in because other teams jump them. But I think that based on the resumes that they've amassed so far, it's kind of hard to justify leaving any of them out. And that also would be the case for Ole Miss if they would have a winning record, but they don't. That's the distinction.
And Neil, the precedent that has been set is typically, and I don't think it's ever happened where an SEC team, if you've got 13 conference wins and you're in the top 30 in RPI, at minimum 13 SEC wins, top 30 RPI, you're in. That is the precedent that's been set. We'll see if that follows. By the way, you mentioned LSU at the time of us speaking. They're up 9-1 on Georgia in the top of the 9th inning. So LSU looks like
I have that. Yeah, that's I have that on the background. So barring a Herculean collapse, they're going to hold on to win this game. They're going to the NCAA tournament, unless again they're bid thieves. You have a team like I don't know who the last place team in the ACC tournament is, but whoever like that 12 seed in the ACC tournament goes and steals a bid. Barring something like that, I think LSU should be safe. But again, to me, it's them and Vandy in a different tier. Florida, Alabama, South Carolina on a tier above them in terms of being safe.
So, Neil, whether Florida ends up in Clemson like you project or somewhere else, which a fascinating regional you have them in, Clemson being the host, Coastal Carolina as the 2, Florida the 3, South Carolina Upstate the 4. It's going to be, and Neil, this is coming, and you guys may say this. Heck, I may say this. It's a really sexy thing, though, to say, man, I feel bad for the team that's got Florida as a 3 seed in their regional. Man, I feel bad for the team that's got LSU as a 3 seed in their regional. So sticking with the Gators specifically, I mean, we're going to hear that a lot. Do you feel like there's some real juice to that? Do you feel confident that Florida can be a real headache for somebody else out there whatever regional they land in, and that maybe the SEC schedule, while it's, the record's not exactly pretty to look at, there's something to that the SEC is different, and it has sort of gotten Florida ready for this postseason grind, and that they're going to be bringing a different level to the postseason. Do you feel like Florida can take advantage of that and potentially spoil somebody's regional?
So the thing that I like to say to people whenever they ask me about like what exactly in all kinds of weather is that maybe aren't super familiar with the brand is that I like to try to run in all kinds of weather as like a fan media sort of hybrid. Like it's not fully a fan site, but it's not fully a media site either. It kind of marries the two concepts. And so I think when I put these brackets together, these bracketology pieces that I drop together, I'm factoring in the two things. One, as a Florida fan, I can then just for 5 seconds pretend to be a fan of another team and say, hey, do I want to see this Florida team in my regional? Do I want to see a Coastal Carolina in my regional? I try to play that other fan perspective whenever I'm putting these together. And that's kind of how I do it. I try to make them based on parity. And also, there are obviously conference constraints, like Florida couldn't be in Georgia's regional, or they couldn't be in their same regional as LSU. Or
But Florida will play Georgia in your projections if in the Supers, which would be an electric matchup, by the way.
Which will be a rematch of what we just saw in Athens. But
yeah.
No, I mean, the point I'm going for here is that I think that any team in the NCAA tournament is in some fashion scary because either you're talented or you're hot. Like, for example, my dad's alma mater, shout out, fight on for Penn, the Quakers. Nobody thinks that they can match up with a Florida or an LSU.
Really solid baseball program. Yeah, really solid.
Last year, a 4 seed going to the regional final, taking out Auburn, who was a regional host. Nobody saw that coming. So there are going to be elements to, I don't want to see this team for any number of different reasons, whether it's Florida for the talent that they have or Penn because they're hot, because in Penn's case, they had to win their conference tournament to get there. So they're playing their best ball at the right time. But I think that Florida is scarier than most. If I'm putting myself in the shoes of any other baseball team in the country, like I'm looking at Oregon State right now, that was the last sort of bracket I put together. Like I see the teams 1 to 16, then I get the conference, the teams I project to win the conference and then I rank the rest of the teams based on, the RPI, the strength of schedule. Were there any real bad anomalies, like bad losses, or were there any real good anomalies, good wins, et cetera? And then I put them all together. Oregon State was the last one I put in there. And so TCU, to me, was a team that I thought was kind of that middle of the road 3-line team. Oregon State was a 7. So that means that they're kind of in the middle in terms of where they are as regional hosts, like from 1 to 16 on that scale. So for Florida, the case was, I don't want to see this team under any circumstances. And that's a very distinct difference from like a Penn because they're hot, because they're playing their best ball at the right time. It's very different than like a Northeastern, which is very difficult to examine and to make heads or tails of them. I don't know. I mean, they don't play an SEC schedule. They're up in the Northeast. They have a very good record, but their RPI is in the top 32, but they don't have the credentials that a Florida does. So Florida is the kind of team that no one wants to face in a regional, in a super regional, or even in the World Series. Because if Florida does pull the unthinkable and get to the World Series, it means that they're playing their best ball at the right time, which was the Penn argument. It also means that this talent that they have, that a Penn, a Northeastern, and a James Madison, that those teams don't have, is now coming together, which makes them more frightening than most.
Neil, on a scale to 1 to 10, how confident are you that run can happen for Florida? Been a tough season. Like you said, there's talent. Scale of 1 to 10. What do you think? What's your gut
Omaha? To Omaha?
To a run to Omaha.
Run to the World Series? I'll give it like a 3 or 4. It's always.
I was testing your objectivity there. See.
Well, but that's the thing. The 3 of the 4 is also more plausible than it would be to say for like a Penn, because they're only banking on how hot they are. You're not banking on the natural talent showing itself and taking over games. But again, it also depends on who's in their region.
A lot of it is matchups, to your point.
Yeah,
they need the right matchup.
Playing, how the wind is blowing, are the fly balls going to die at the warning track, or are they going to carry? It's a lot of miscellaneous stuff that you got to sort of gauge once you see the matchups. But if I'm going to, toot my own horn and say that this regional does come to fruition, I mean, I like Florida's chances to win the Clemson regional a lot more than I would. I mean, again, they can't go to Kentucky, they can't go to Tennessee, but I mean, I'd like that regional matchup more than like in Oklahoma. I'd like that regional more than FSU. That right field fence is just weird, and frankly, I think should be banned because that's just so unbaseball-like. It's not the green, you're not Boston, you're not the Red Sox. You don't have that history baked in. You have 0 national championships. But if they go there and the balls that should be leaving the yard are just singles or doubles at most, that plays a big part of it, because Florida is a home run hitting team. So depending on the matchup, I would say maybe as high as a 5 or a 6. If it's a bad matchup, maybe as low as a 2 or 3. But you don't ever want to count them out completely. Too much talent.
Couldn't end the show without a jab at Florida State. Love it. Absolutely love it, Neil. On brand. On brand. I love that. Neil Schulman, inallkindsofweather.com, does a great job talking all things Gators. Neil, for those who do not know, let folks know where they can check out your work.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me again. Always fun. In All Kinds of Weather on Facebook, at All Kinds Weather on Twitter and Instagram. The In All Kinds of Weather forecast is our show /podcast. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, pretty much anywhere else that you get your podcasts. If you do like our content, please go and subscribe to the In All Kinds of Weather forecast on YouTube. Give us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. Always appreciate that. Chris, always appreciate you, man. Always fun.
We'll do it again, man. For Neil Schulman, I'm Chris Phillips. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll catch you on the other side.